Hi everyone, I'm Anita Sharma. You're watching AnewZ. Here are your headlines. Russia detains an Uzbek national after the killing of Senior General Igor Kirillov in Moscow. Mayhem in Mayot. The French overseas territory struggles with the impact of deadly cyclone Cheeto. Canadian crisis. Calls ramp up for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to step down after his finance minister abruptly resigns. A 29-year-old Uzbekistan national is detained over the killing of Russia's Nuclear Protection Forces general and his assistant in Moscow. Russian authorities say the man was hired by Ukrainian intelligence. Meantime, the Russian Foreign Ministry says it will address the assassination of Igor Kirillov at the United Nations Security Council.
The Investigative Committee and the Ministry of Internal Affairs have confirmed the arrest of a suspect linked to the explosion on Ryazansky Prospect in Moscow, which resulted in the deaths of Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov and his assistant. The Federal Security Service reports that the suspect confessed during interrogation to being recruited by Ukrainian intelligence services. He was directed to Moscow, where he received and planted a powerful improvised explosive device on an electric scooter near Kirillov's residence. To monitor the target, he rented a car equipped with a camera that transmitted live footage to organizers in Dnipro, Ukraine. The device was remotely detonated when Kirillov and his assistant exited the building.
For this crime, the executor was guaranteed a cash reward of $100,000 and residency in one of the European countries. Other persons involved in the organization of this crime are being identified.
The suspect was apprehended less than 24 hours later in the village of Chernoy, Balashikha district, Moscow region, after a coordinated effort by the FSB, Ministry of Internal Affairs, and the Investigative Committee. He remains in custody as the investigation continues. The Ministry of Internal Affairs of Uzbekistan has stated it has no information about the detained individual. Meanwhile, Russia plans to address the assassination of Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov at a United Nations Security Council. The move follows allegations that Ukraine orchestrated the attack, which Moscow has described as a terrorist act. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said the issue would be discussed with Western arms supplies to Ukraine and vowed all involved in the killing would be held accountable.
The permanent mission of Russia to the UN will raise the issue of the committed terrorist act during the UN Security Council meeting on the supply of Western weapons to Ukraine, requested by Russia on December 20th. We are confident that all the organizers and perpetrators of the murder of Igor Kirillov will be found, punished, whoever it may be, wherever they are. To all the curators of the Kiev regime, Russophobes of all kinds, we respond with the whole country and all peoples. You will not intimidate us. We defend the truth.
The meeting at the UN Security Council is scheduled to take place on December 20th.
The United Nations Special Envoy for Syria, Geir Pedersen, says progress is needed for an inclusive political transition in the country so that Syria can get the economic support it urgently requires. Speaking to the UN Security Council, Pedersen noted that reconstruction efforts and sanctions relief are essential. He addressed the council from Damascus, where he previously held talks with Syria's new leadership following the toppling of Bashar al-Assad.
Concrete movement on an inclusive political transition will be key in ensuring Syria receives the economic support it needs. There is clear international willingness to engage. The needs are immense and could only be addressed with broad support, including a smooth end to sanctions, appropriate action on designations too, and full reconstruction.
A senior UN official calls on world powers in Iran to restore a 2015 deal that would lift sanctions on Tehran in return for restrictions with its nuclear program. The deal collapsed back in 2018 after then U.S. President Donald Trump unilaterally withdrew. Iran then moved away from its nuclear-related commitments under the deal. European and Iranian diplomats met in November to discuss ways to ease tensions ahead of Trump's return to the Oval Office. But earlier this month, Britain, France, and Germany sent a letter to the UN Security Council stating that they are ready, if needed, to reinstate all UN sanctions on Iran to prevent the country from progressing on the nuclear front. To Vanuatu now, where the death toll following a 7.3 magnitude earthquake has claimed at least 14 lives, and officials expect that number could rise even more. Hundreds of people were injured and hospitals are overwhelmed.
The earthquake in Vanuatu's capital, Port Vila, has left over 200 people injured. The National Disaster Management Office has confirmed that an estimated 116,000 people, about 1/3 of the country's population, have been affected by the disaster. Rescue operations are underway as authorities work to locate those still trapped under the rubble, especially in the most heavily damaged areas.
There are 14 confirmed dead. That number is expected to climb, and we have over 200 casualties that have gone through the Vila Central Hospital and the Vanuatu Mobile Force Barracks Hospital so far.
Hospitals in Port Vila are overwhelmed by the influx of casualties. Emergency departments are working around the clock to treat the injured. With critical medical resources stretched thin, the government has declared a state of emergency and imposed a curfew in the worst hit areas.
The government has declared 5 days of state of emergency. UNICEF, we are working with the government to look at many issues related to children. So, for instance, just after the earthquake, we were at the hospital assisting in providing first aid kits, tents also because the hospital has been damaged and the structure is questionable. People don't want to go inside.
Alongside the medical response, UNICEF is focused on addressing the urgent need for clean water.
It's separated in the middle.
The French overseas territory of Mayot is grappling with widespread destruction in the aftermath of Cyclone Cheeto, described as the strongest storm to hit the archipelago in over 90 years. Striking over the weekend, the cyclone raised concerns about disaster preparedness and response efforts.
The poorest territory of France, archipelago Mayot, is living a nightmare. Residents report severe devastation, including roofs torn off buildings, streets littered with debris, and entire areas rendered inaccessible. The full extent of the destruction still remains unclear.
We heard that there will be rescue services, aid, soldiers, but for the moment we haven't seen them. We managed in our neighborhood to clear the streets. There were policemen who came and helped us clear the streets because they were scared that at night the burglars might attack the houses.
Local authorities have struggled to provide essential services as water and electricity supplies remain severely disrupted. Residents in many areas feel the response has been inadequate.
Since Saturday morning, when the cyclone passed in just 3.5 hours, nothing has really happened, apart from us, the people, trying to clean up. I haven't seen any municipal technical services here. I was concerned about that. Where I come from, whether it snows or the weather is bad, technical services are on the ground, managing things regardless of the situation.
Amid the crisis, calls for targeted aid from the French government have grown louder, with residents warning that the rebuilding process might extend over a long period.
I expect the state to provide special specific aid for Mayot, because for Mayot to recover it will take years. I may have exaggerated, but when I talk about years, it could be 2 years, it could be 3 years. Already we don't have the means to clear the debris.
A video released by the French military showed soldiers and medical teams providing aid to residents of Mayot after cyclone. Aid, including essential goods, medical staff and police, is being delivered through an air bridge from Reunion Island, the territory's main lifeline. French officials have warned that hundreds, possibly thousands, may have died in Mayot. Disrupted transportation links have further isolated the island, complicating relief and recovery efforts. The situation has reignited debates about Mayot's infrastructure, its capacity to handle natural disasters, and broader systemic issues, including poverty and immigration, that exacerbate the territory's vulnerabilities.
Cyclone Chido's devastation in Mayot underscores France's neglect of its overseas territories. The disaster highlights ongoing poverty, overcrowding, and inadequate support from the French government.
The Cyclone Chido's destructions exposed long-standing issues of poverty, overcrowding, and climate vulnerability in Mayot. The island's fragile infrastructure and underfunded public services have left its residents struggling to cope. Local leaders have sharply criticized the French government, accusing it of neglecting Mayot's needs, especially in the wake of the disaster, and demanding more support to address the health and infrastructure crisis exacerbated by the cyclone. Mayot is the poorest of France's overseas territories, with the lowest GDP per capita in the nation, a stark contrast to wealthier regions like Ile-de-France. The island also faces health challenges, rarely seen in mainland France, including frequent outbreaks of hepatitis A, cholera and typhoid fever. Despite these struggles, the French government's response has been criticized for being insufficient, raising questions about President Macron's commitment to supporting Mayot and other overseas territories. The Mayot crisis highlights deep issues within the French government, mirrored by strong opposition to the 2025 budget. Prime Minister François Bayrou faced criticism over tax hikes, increased borrowing and reliance on last year's framework. Left-wing parties have condemned the plan, while Marine Le Pen's National Rally criticized the tax increases but withheld final judgment. Recalling remarks made last week, far-right leader Jordan Bardella cautioned Prime Minister Bayrou against blindly adhering to President Macron's policies. As tensions rise, the government's ability to address the urgent needs of its territories and secure a stable economic future remains uncertain, leaving the country at a crossroads.
Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev addresses Mayot and France's handling of the crisis. In an interview with Dmitry Kiselev, the Director General of the Rossiya Segodnya news agency, the president calls out French President Emmanuel Macron's regime and says that it's turning France into a failed state. Furthermore, he points out that France was already bid adieu by countries like Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali. The Azerbaijani president also discusses NATO-Russia tensions, foreign influence in the Caucasus, and shifting political alliances.
From NATO-Russia relations to the shifting dynamics in the Caucasus and the EU's involvement in the region, Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev has addressed a wide range of issues in an interview with the Rossiya Segodnya news agency, highlighting the country's evolving role in global and regional geopolitics. Discussing critical global and regional matters, he noted that while NATO and Russia remain locked in tense relations, Azerbaijan is committed to stability and dialogue, positioning itself as a neutral partner to facilitate communication between opposing sides.
The experience of Mr. Trump's first presidential term, as well as the statements made by him and members of his team during and after the election campaign, allow us some hope. Therefore, imagining a scenario where NATO and Russia engage in a hot war would be akin to imagining a global apocalypse. It is clear that there would be no winners in this war and no countries. Even those far from NATO or Russian territories would feel safe. I believe there is enough political wisdom in Washington, Moscow, and other capitals to prevent such a nightmare scenario from materializing. I also believe that Azerbaijan can contribute to détente, a slightly forgotten word that is now making a return in international discussions.
President Aliyev described Armenia's growing military cooperation with France as a direct threat to Azerbaijan's security, warning of the potential consequences of offensive weapon deliveries from France, India and the United States. He also sharply criticized the actions of French President Emmanuel Macron and the EU's foreign policy chief Josep Borrell. Additionally, Aliyev criticized the French government's activities in Africa, particularly in the Sahel region, as well as its role in the Middle East.
EuroNews вчера передает. 75% населения острова Mayot.
EuroNews reported yesterday that 75% of the population of the island of Mayot lives below the poverty line, and 30 to 40% of housing is dilapidated. This is legally French territory. Although it is part of the Comoro Islands, France illegally holds it. By what right? During the riots in New Caledonia, 13 people were killed, over 100 were injured, and more than 1,000 were arrested. The leaders of the popular protests were taken to France and are held in custody. This is Macron's dictatorship, his regime. When I speak about these issues, all their watchdogs in the form of non-governmental organizations or the media are unleashed against me. So while we, the Azerbaijani public, began to highlight this issue, the situation is now much more serious. Naturally, our hearts are with these people who have been denied all rights. What can be said about New Caledonia when in the center of Europe, in Corsica, the Corsican language is banned in public places? Is this democracy? Are these human rights? France may have once been a great country, a country of great thinkers, scientists and writers, but it is no longer the case. Macron's regime is turning France into a failed state. I'll give you examples. Failure in Africa, the Sahel region. They were told adieu by countries like Niger, Burkina Faso and Mali. Next is Chad, which has already asked them to leave, and Senegal, where a national spirit president has come to power.
Highlighting Azerbaijan's military readiness, President Aliyev stated that the country has achieved a high degree of operability in military operations, which he considers a crucial factor for maintaining stability in the Caucasus.
Today's world and the way events are unfolding is further evidence that the world has changed dramatically. The realities that were created and the rules of the game defined by the results of World War II no longer work. Even global actors are not hiding it. The power factor is once again coming to the forefront of political aspirations, and countries that realize this sooner than later can feel safer today, although no country can feel completely safe in today's world.
Expressing significant concern, he reiterated that the military support Armenia is receiving from countries like France, India and the United States poses a direct threat to Azerbaijan's security. He called for an end to the arming of Armenia.
This is a direct threat, which we have communicated both publicly and privately to the Armenian Prime Minister. We have expressed our concerns to France, to the United States, which under the Biden administration has shifted its balanced approach towards the South Caucasus, favoring Armenia. We have many examples showing that these threats are serious. The offensive weapons France is supplying to Armenia pose a practical threat to Azerbaijan. Given that our border with Armenia is more than 1,000 kilometers long, with many settlements near the border and former refugees returning to these areas, we cannot be passive observers. We have repeatedly told Armenia and its patrons in the US State Department that this must stop. But unfortunately, the arming of Armenia continues at an alarming pace.
Turning to Azerbaijan's neighbor, Georgia, President Aliyev voiced apprehension over foreign interference, particularly from Western-backed NGOs. He stressed Azerbaijan's commitment to stability in Georgia, underlining the peaceful and long-standing relationship between the two nations.
In Georgia, I see that the situation is stabilizing, and we are pleased with this. Georgia is an important partner and a close friend. Our nations have lived in peace for centuries. Therefore, instability in Georgia harms both Georgia and Azerbaijan. For our part, we are doing everything to ensure Georgia's stability and successful development. Turning to foreign influence, we know that thousands of NGOs operate in Georgia, funded by the West. The people working in these organizations number in the tens of thousands. We understand what this means. We too had a period in Azerbaijan when grant eaters and grant givers flourished, but we stopped that. Now any grants, whether from Azerbaijan or abroad, must be registered, and relevant authorities must decide whether to approve them.
In his remarks, President Ilham Aliyev portrayed Azerbaijan as a resilient and strategic actor in an increasingly complex global landscape. By confronting foreign interference and criticism, Azerbaijan continues to assert its sovereignty, positioning itself as a pivotal force for stability in the Caucasus and beyond.
France's highest court upholds the conviction of former President Nicolas Sarkozy for corruption and influence peddling. Sarkozy appealed his 2021 conviction, which resulted in a 3-year prison sentence, 2 of which were suspended, and he was ordered to wear an electronic bracelet instead of serving the last year in prison. Sarkozy's lawyers said they would appeal to the European Court of Human Rights. Sarkozy expressed on social media that he's innocent and would continue to fight the ruling. The conviction stemmed from his attempt to bribe a judge and use his influence to obtain confidential information about an investigation into his 2007 campaign finances. Sarkozy is also facing a separate trial next year over alleged Libyan funding for his 2007 presidential campaign, which he denies. If convicted, he could face up to 10 years in prison. Sarkozy's predecessor, Jacques Chirac, is the only other French president to be convicted of corruption. The heat is on Canada's Prime Minister to step down after his Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland, abruptly resigned Monday before delivering an expected fiscal update. In a letter, she stated that she had to quit after Trudeau told her he was removing her from the finance post. The two apparently clashed over how to deal with the country's ballooning deficit and potential tariffs from the U.S. Meantime, President-elect Donald Trump continues to needle the Trudeau government, once again stating that the U.S. should annex Canada. This after he stated earlier that Freeland's behavior is, quote, totally toxic.
In Tuesday's final question period before a month-long winter break, Canada's House of Commons erupted with tension. The Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's political opponents criticised the absent Prime Minister for the recent turmoil. They also condemned him for the year's $62 billion budget deficit.
The finance minister resigns, the prime minister hides all day and then has to beg his MPs not to fire him. But the worst news, buried underneath it all, was a devastating gut punch to Canadian taxpayers. A $62 billion deficit smashing through the already insane $40 billion guardrail. Canada is a serious G7 NATO partner staring down the threat of 25% tariffs. We deserve a strong leader with a new mandate.
His administration, Justin Trudeau appointed Dominic LeBlanc, a close ally and former public safety minister, as the new finance minister, LeBlanc wasted no time defending the government's actions.
That our government is very proud of the fall economic statement that we made public yesterday. Mr. Speaker, the fall economic statement speaks to growth in the Canadian economy. It speaks to supporting Canadians with serious affordability challenges. It speaks to a declining debt to GDP ratio, the best in the G7. And Mr. Speaker, we haven't finished supporting Canadians, something the Conservatives aren't interested in doing.
The Prime Minister Justin Trudeau defended his leadership in response to growing opposition criticism. Trudeau rejected calls for his resignation, stressing that his focus remained on delivering results despite internal party turmoil.
As a country, we've gone through a lot these past years. The pandemic, inflation, so much conflict and suffering around the world, international law being trampled, the very foundations of democracy being attacked. We've seen tough times before, and we pulled through, because when we pull together, when Canadians pull together, nothing, and I mean nothing, can stop us.
Meanwhile, Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland's resignation came after growing policy differences with Justin Trudeau. She cited disagreements over how to respond to incoming President Donald Trump's threats of tariffs, particularly the looming possibility of 25% tariffs on Canadian goods. Trudeau's Liberals, with a minority of seats, rely on the support of other parties to govern. A recent poll showed the Conservatives with 43% public support, the Liberals at 23%, and the New Democrats at 20%. The House of Commons is on winter break, and a confidence vote on Trudeau's leadership could take place as early as late February or March.
In the U.S., Luigi Manon was indicted by New York prosecutors over the killing of UnitedHealth CEO Brian Thompson. He faces 11 charges, including first-degree murder and murder as an act of terrorism.
Luigi Manon, accused of killing UnitedHealth Group CEO Brian Thompson on a Manhattan street earlier this month, has been indicted by New York prosecutors. The indictment alleges that Mangione killed Thompson with the intent to influence the policy of a government entity through intimidation and coercion.
Our work will never be able to undo the fact that a life was lost. We are here to announce that Luigi Manon, the defendant, is charged with 1 count of murder in the first degree and 2 counts of murder in the second degree, including 1 count of murder in the second degree as an act of terrorism.
Mangione's attorney, Karen Friedman Agnifilo, declined to comment on the charges. Ivy League-educated Mangione was charged with murder on December 9th for killing Thompson outside a Manhattan hotel. He was apprehended after a 5-day manhunt following the incident. Mangione is currently being held in Pennsylvania on firearms-related charges. Bragg stated that Mangione might choose to waive his extradition rights. A hearing on Mangione's extradition is scheduled for Friday in Pennsylvania. Friends and social media posts indicate that Mangione suffered from chronic back pain, though it remains unclear whether his health condition is related to the shooting. Mangione has been praised in certain circles, with thousands of dollars donated online for his legal defense.
In business news, Nissan reportedly enters preliminary merger talks with Honda to strengthen its competitive position in the electric vehicle market. The Japanese Nikkei writes that the long-term plan also involves Mitsubishi.
Honda and Nissan are considering operating under a holding company and will soon sign a memorandum of understanding, the Nikkei reported. Their respective stakes in the new entity as well as other details will be decided later, and they also look to eventually bring Mitsubishi Motors on as a holding company, the paper said. The Financial Times reported that the exploratory talks about a merger were at an early stage. There are, however, concerns about a possible political backlash since a merger could result in significant job cuts. Any merger would face significant U.S. scrutiny, and President-elect Donald Trump has vowed to take a hard line on imported vehicles, including threatening 25% tariffs on vehicles shipped from Canada and Mexico. He could seek concessions from Honda and Nissan to approve any deal, auto industry officials said. Honda and Nissan both produce cars in Mexico for export to the United States. Honda and Nissan would also have to work out how to integrate their different corporate cultures if they proceed with a merger, analysts said.
In space news, China's Shenzhou 19 crew, currently on a 6-month mission on the Tiangong space station, sets a new record, completing a 9-hour spacewalk.
The crew of China's Shenzhou 19 mission has broken a new record for extravehicular activities, completing a 9-hour spacewalk on Tuesday. Astronauts Kai Toyutsi and Song Lingdong were assigned to the spacewalk, while Wang Haoze assisted from inside the space station. This marks the 17th spacewalk by Chinese astronauts. Before closing the hatch, the crew thanked the ground team for their support during the mission. The leader praised the team and expressed confidence in future spacewalks, while others reflected on the importance of manned spaceflight and congratulated fellow astronauts for their successful mission. The Shenzhou 19 mission, launched in October, continues its 6-month stay aboard China's space station.
That's all from us. Thank you so much for watching AnewZ. Please stay up to date by visiting our website, AnewZ.tv. Bye for now.